Hi, everyone. Welcome to Ocean Rock Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Neymat. Today, I have a very special guest, Audra Hanson. She is here to talk about her own recovery journey. And without any further ado, hi, Audra.
Hi, so good to be here.
Yeah, good. Thanks for coming down. I know you live in LA. You came down all the way down here.
Yep.
Really, I was really interested in learning more about how you went through your own journey, dealing with mental health, dealing with substance issues, and what it took for you to eventually get sober and on the right path to recovery. So why don't we kind of start with how it all started? I mean, when did you start having either mental health or drug, alcohol? What was it for you that got you needing some help?
Yeah, so I first started exhibiting a lot of kind of like mental health concerns. I wasn't diagnosed with anything around the age of 13.
Okay.
I was just having a lot of like emotional outbursts. And then so my mom actually put me into therapy, and I went to therapy. I've been in therapy since I've been 13. And then I was introduced to alcohol and drugs at the age of 16. And for me, it was just an immediate obsession. I mean, I'm a very prime example of somebody who is a true alcoholic. Like Alcoholics Anonymous, that book is me. So yeah, my life just kind of did a full 180, and I became really obsessed with drinking and drugs and started to derail for me.
Mm-hmm. So when that started happening, first of all, some of the mental health issues at 13, that's when you started getting some therapy. Mm-hmm. And did you feel that was working for you, or was there kind of a disconnect between you and what was going on because of your age?
Yeah, I was very resistant to it. I didn't know what was going on with myself, and it was good that my mom put me in therapy, and I think it might have maybe helped a little bit, and I think it let me, kind of expel some energy and start to think about my mental health more. But
Right.
I was just so determined not to do anything my mom wanted me to at that age. So
you're a teenager, you're rebellious.
Very rebellious.
You're doing these things because they want you to do it, but you're not really fully committed.
Yep.
And then at 16, that's when the drugs and alcohol came into the equation. And you labeled yourself, you said, hey, I'm a true alcoholic. So, I mean, for you, when you had a drink, how was it different than when your friends had a drink?
Yeah, I mean, I just have that gear to keep going, and I don't have any off switch. And so where my friends maybe 3 drinks into the night, they're like, oh, I need to slow down. My brain is like, nope, let's keep going. And so that's where I differentiate.
So then
myself.
That kind of continued. When you're 16 and older, you're 18 now, you're 21, you're still, in those ages dealing with alcoholism. How did you see that kind of impacting your life, whether it was school or your family and just different environments?
Yeah, it really impacted every single aspect of my life. I mean, before I was drinking, I was a great student. Like, I was pretty much a straight A student. I was involved in lots of activities. I mean, I would kind of push the boundaries in some respects, but I was not really like super rebellious until I started drinking. And then it was like, I'm skipping school, I'm failing out of classes, I'm going and partying until 3 a.m. And so it was just like so unlike me, like when I was going through that.
Right. So now, you've graduated from high school, you're in college. There's, your family, you're not living with your, I'm assuming you're not, what happened as far as, so when you went from dealing with these issues, but you were at home, actually, let's start there. When you were still living at home at 16, but now you're dealing with alcoholism and drugs, is that something that your parents were aware of, or were you pretty good at hiding it?
Oh, yeah, I was terrible at hiding it. I was not that sneaky kid. It was very apparent what I was doing. I was bringing weed into the house. I was bringing drugs into the house. Okay. And so, they actually put me in treatment the first time at 17. And so it was like within 6 months, I was already in a treatment center. So it was pretty bad. Got it.
And they were just trying to help you, but they didn't know, exactly what to do, right? And so you went to treatment at 17. Do you mind sharing where you went, or tell us a little bit more about that program?
Yeah, I'm from Fargo, North Dakota. And so it was in Fargo. It was called Prairie. And everybody who was in that program, specifically when I was there, was either there because their parents were making them or because it was court mandated. Okay. So it wasn't really a good environment for really wanting to be better.
Right.
And I don't want to like say anything too bad about the program, but it just wasn't really like a useful program for me.
Right.
I think there's
maybe it was because you weren't ready, or because just sometimes different programs work for different people. So it might have worked for somebody, but not for you.
Yes.
So then what happened after that? I mean, what was your next step kind of in your journey?
Yeah, so after that, I turned 18, and so it was kind of like, okay, I have free reign to do what I want, and I was still living at the house, so that was kind of a conflict. My mom was trying to get me to move out, and I was still finishing high school, and so I actually got put into another treatment center if I wanted to stay living at the house, which was actually a really good treatment center, but I just wasn't wanting it at all for myself, so I pushed the boundaries as much as I could until my parents finally helped me move out of the house.
Right. So, I mean, they were setting boundaries, and they say, hey, if you want to live here, you have to be sober, you can't be using, you can't be drinking, but you weren't really having it. You were like, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm 18 now. I want to live my life. And so when you moved out, did you stay in North Dakota, or did you travel, or what did you do?
Yeah, I actually moved to Minneapolis, which is about 4 hours away from Fargo, and it's the biggest city that's closest to Fargo. And I moved there in April of my senior year. I actually finished early in the first semester, so I was able to get out and move.
Okay. So you moved to Minneapolis. Now you're going to school there, partly partying, doing all kinds of things that young people do. But then, like you said earlier, you have no stop, right? Like you have that extra gear. So like, what type of situations did you find yourself in? I think that's one of the things where a lot of people regret. Like, I don't even remember a lot of it, right? Like, what was drinking doing to you as far as getting into bad situations?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually telling my roommate the other day about a time in my life, and she was asking me questions, and I'm like, I can't even fully remember what was happening for a lot of that time. And so I was definitely getting into a lot of trouble. I mean, not like legal trouble at that point, but I was going to lots of raves. I was just partying probably, 5 to 6 days out of the week. And then I ended up actually going through a drug-induced psychosis at 18, right before turning 19. And that really shifted things for me pretty drastically. And that following year, I was in like a severe PTSD state, which I wasn't drinking and using as much, but I was just like mentally so unwell.
Right. And so that's where, mental health and addiction and substance use are so interrelated for a lot of people. Some people use that. I guess that's my other question is, why do you think that you were using or drinking? Was it just because you couldn't stop and that was the gear that you were at? Or were you trying to kind of numb yourself, or were you dealing, try to use it as kind of medicine for this mental health concerns and issues that you had?
Yeah, I definitely think it was like a perfect storm of mental health coupled with just like the disease of addiction in terms of what I believe. And so I have now been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which, looking back on my whole life, I'm like, wow, this makes a lot of sense. Yeah. But I didn't get diagnosed actually up until my mid-20s. So it was kind of just like anxiety, depression, and then PTSD, but I was never really like honing into what was actually going on. So it felt so chaotic. And then, just the obsession with drinking. I think that's just a part of my brain that I maybe inherited.
That's the alcoholism. And that's, I've talked to so many people who deal with that, and it just, something is different, and it's that light bulb, and it's like, once you have that first sip, you can't stop, and it affects you differently, and that's that true alcoholism that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So what was the next step as far as you going through that process? I'm assuming you're miserable. You're like, I don't want to be feeling like this. Are you still in school at that point?
Yeah, kind of. It was, by the time I first got sober at 22, I really wasn't going to school because it was just so,
it kind of dropped out because of all the distraction from it.
I was working bottle service, which, is kind of in the party atmosphere. So
were you still in Minnesota, or did you move at that?
Yes. Okay. I was in Minneapolis.
Okay. So now you're looking at, you're saying you're sober at that point, but you're working in that environment. How long were you able to stay sober?
Before I went to treatment, the longest I was able to not drink was 2 weeks. And that was like literally on the 14th day, I would be like back to,
Right.
back to going crazy.
Right.
So.
And that's when you were trying to do it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of ultimately, what form of treatment did you go to that helped you get the tools that you needed to stay sober?
Yeah, so I went to an intensive outpatient back in October of 2018, and I went there for 6 months, and it was for co-occurring disorders. So it addressed both the mental health and the alcohol. I was seeing an addictions therapist, I was seeing a psychiatrist, and then I had my group 4 days a week, as well as we had a large group. So I was getting a lot of help, and I really believe that it takes a whole village essentially to help somebody recover.
No, I love that. I mean, I think we have an IOP as well, outpatient program, and what's beautiful about the IOP program is there's so many different things that you learn, right? So there's different counselors, you do group therapy, you do individual therapy. If the family is involved, you can do family, and you kind of learn from different people, not only the facilitators, but also from the other people in the program, right? And there's a lot that you can learn from each other in that kind of group environment. But also you can have that individual therapy, right? And so how would you describe how treatment in that IOP program was different than just getting that kind of before when you were in therapy and getting that talk therapy? What was the difference between those two experiences?
Yeah, I mean, it was so necessary for me because it's the first place that I ever felt understood in my addiction, because I was around others that, for one, were my age. I'd gone to AA prior, and in North Dakota, it's a lot of older people going to AA. So I'm like, okay, that's not me. Or I would just focus on, they had, a lot of childhood trauma, and I didn't. I grew up in a really actually amazing household, and so it made me feel very confused and ashamed of myself that I had these issues. And so when I went to treatment, I met other people who grew up in similar households, were my age, women that were my age. So it was just wow, I felt so understood. And I really accredit going to that facility to my ability to now stay sober.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and I know that from talking before that you come from a very good family, your parents are successful, your mom took great care of you guys, like you just said, you have a sister, and you guys really have, a really close family. And then, you weren't dealing with certain traumatic events from your childhood, right? But it was that genuine, organic mental health disorders, issues like you mentioned, the BPD, bipolar disorder, and then that true alcoholism. I mean, some of those things are genetic. Some of those things are just, things that happen to people and they have to deal with. But you didn't know it at that time, right? So at that time, you're a teen. You are trying to just be a teen, right? Trying to figure that out by itself with no other issues. That's challenging, right?
Yeah.
And so now you have all this stuff added to that. And again, you had a family that was supportive, but you still were struggling. And it wasn't until you went to that program where you had the like-minded people, you had, different types of recovery and different types of programming. How long were you in that program, in the IOP program?
Yeah, I was there for 6 months.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one thing we've noticed too, is that, a lot of people want to go to treatment for a short amount of time. And they're I either don't have time, or, this is getting boring, it's getting repetitive. But I mean, any skill that we learn is something that we learn through repetition. And so if you're going to programming and it's 9 hours a week or whatever, and you feel hey, I'm kind of burned out. Well, first of all, if you're not doing that and you're drinking or doing drugs, that's a lot more stress and suffering, right? So it's the better alternative. But it's also one of those things where the more amount of time, the more time you have in treatment, and the more time that you have away from the drugs or alcohol, and in a supportive environment where you can talk to people about these issues and about your feelings and about even the mental health related issues, and have that group of supportive characters around you, that enhances the ability of somebody to stay sober or deal with their mental health issues, right? And so how old were you when you found yourself in the program where it was actually working, and you were, you wanted to be there and you were receiving what they were giving you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was pretty immediate in that program. I was really desperate for help, and so I was kind of just trying to listen to as much as I could early on. I will say that I was still trying to kind of navigate it in my own way. Like I would do everything they told me, but then after I like graduated from the program, I was like, I'm done. I don't need to keep working on myself. And then I did end up relapsing.
Okay.
So I, to your point, it's important that people understand that it's a long process. And I think it's, I was like 6 years in addiction, like 6 months in treatment is nothing compared to that. So
exactly. Yeah. And you got all the tools that you needed. So even if, and I hear this all the time, sometimes there's a relapse, and it depends what you do with the relapse, right? Like if it's just, let me go back down the dark tunnel and, this is all bullshit and there's no hope. Well, that's not going to go in the right direction. But for the people who they say, okay, what did I stop doing, right? There was things I was doing during that 6 months that was keeping me sober. And for whatever reason, I thought, okay, now I'm cured and I'm just going to go back to my life. And well, the unfortunate problem that people dealing with mental health or substance use deal with is that there is no magic cure, right? And it's something that does take that daily effort. And it does take the work that you do on a daily basis. But by going through these programs, you have the tools to navigate that. And tell me a little bit about, so in addition to the treatment and the therapy that you're getting, you mentioned AA before. Were you doing steps? Were you active in AA and other types of programs related to that continuation of your recovery journey?
Yeah, I was. I didn't go to AA that frequently the first time I got sober because Hazelden, the place I went to, was so intensive. But once I relapsed for the last time, I was going to AA every single day, sometimes twice a day.
Right.
And it was all on Zoom because it was in the middle of the pandemic.
Okay.
And then, seeing an addictions therapist. So I was working the steps with both my addictions therapist and my sponsors.
Okay.
So, I really also believe that those recovery support groups work too.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think it's just it's a matter of combining all these pieces together, right? Because you don't deal with these issues just out of nowhere, right? Things develop over time, and it's partly because of genetics, partly because of your environment. And so once maybe there's certain medications that can help with some of the mental health related issues. There's, coping skills that you learn. And then there's also the, through the AA activities and the program that you go to and just being active in AA and going through those steps, that in itself is a form of therapy and treatment, right? And so I think what I've seen from the people who are the most successful is when they combine all the elements, because sometimes you have somebody who's sober, but they really have a lot of issues that they haven't worked on, and that comes across even though they're sober, right? So that's somebody who could use some therapy, could use some outpatient programming, and then you have people who just can't figure it out. And that's when, it takes a village.
Yes.
But part of it is like you have to be ready and you have to be willing to receive the help that they're giving you, right? So you said you went through the pandemic. At that time, were you living back home or were you out here? Where were you? What was kind of your home environment like at that time?
Yeah, I was back in Fargo, North Dakota, actually, and that was partially the reason for my second relapse, because it felt like I had just moved backwards in time, and it was May, and the bars had opened up, and I'm depressed, so it was definitely an interesting experience to get sober in the place that I just, for one, had hated at that point, and also a place where I went really crazy. And so, I was, I got a place there with a friend, and I would go to my parents' house every day. It wasn't probably the best for my mental health to be living with my parents. Not that they're bad or anything. It's just all of us were we need separate spaces. So, yeah.
Right. And I think for everyone it's different, right? So sometimes it works better to remove yourself from your environment. And sometimes but ultimately you need to be able to exist in that environment in a sober and, conscious way, right?
Yeah.
And so whether it's, so sometimes we see people kind of going away for a few months to like a residential program, and then they move back home, and then that's where they start Ocean Rock because they want to do our virtual outpatient programming or virtual IOP. Sometimes there's people who maybe they don't think they need residential or detox at that point, and they're like, hey, maybe we want to start with a virtual outpatient program. But either way, whether you start in the beginning or kind of as a continuum of care, it's a very important, and in my opinion, one of the most important phases in the treatment journey. Number one, because it's something you can do for a few months. It's not like a 28-day residential program or 30-day program. It's something you can do for a month, but we emphasize trying to do that for as long as possible. 3 to 6 months is really a good range of amount of time in that form of treatment. Now for you, once when you finally kind of figured out the different pieces to help you stay sober, and now you've been sober for a while, how did you start seeing your life changing and kind of the environment and the people that you were, hanging out with change?
Yeah, every single part of my life improved, and that wasn't really hard to do at that point because I was pretty much at a super low point. But my relationship with my family improved, with my friends. I went back to school. I was able to graduate college last year.
Nice.
And yeah, I was working again. I was really inspired to do hobbies that I had grown up doing. So I went back to dance class, and just a lot of things shift for you when you start to have, a little longer sober time where, stuff that seemed boring, like sitting at home watching TikTok on the weekends or reading, that's now exhilarating or
you don't
fun
need to go out all the time.
No.
Go to the club, go to raves. You can hang out at home.
Sounds terrible, by the way. So,
you're like,
yeah.
You're like, I don't remember all that.
Yeah, no. So I was very, I was starting to gain a lot of self-confidence after about 6 months. And I will say, I don't know how many people are familiar with PAWS, but post-acute withdrawal syndrome, where it takes 6 to 24 months for your brain to kind of start refiring your dopamine normally. And I was definitely on the latter end of that, where it was kind of like a 24-month process. So I still was feeling not the best, in my first year and even somewhat into my second year. So I think a lot of people, when they get sober, they're so overwhelmed to go back because they're not feeling good, and they don't understand that that's kind of just part of the process.
Right. And it takes time. It takes time. And it took a lot of time to, saturate your brain with the drinking or the drugs or whatever it is. And it takes a long time to get out of that. But, eventually you were able to find kind of that balance, right? And so now you have a nice career. You've graduated from college. You're back down here in LA. So kind of tell me a little bit about just the last few months, just what you've been working on, and now that you've found kind of your purpose, actually let's start with what you're doing now, and then we'll talk about what you're going to do later.
Yeah, so I'm the director of brand partnerships at a talent management company in LA, and I work with a lot of amazing people and people that are really passionate about what they do in the entertainment industry. And I am able to, show up for work. And that's so cool to me huge. Because even when I'd work bottle service, I start at 8 p.m., I might be still too hungover and have to call in. And it's just you build so much shame when you're in addiction. So it's just those small things, like making my bed in the morning and being able to go out after work for apps with my work friends.
It's just you've built discipline around your life, right? Rather than it's just kind of whatever happens, let's wing it, and not holding yourself accountable. Yeah. You're showing up, you're doing the work, you've built a career, and you're kind of passionate about. So how do you see yourself now that you're down here and you're working and you've graduated from college and you've kind of regained your balance and purpose? Where do you see yourself going in the next few years?
Yeah, I'd love to stay working in the entertainment space. I really enjoy that, but also just doing more within the recovery space as well. And I really find passion in the whole recovery community, from AA to just the online recovery community. So as long as I can stay, a part of that, I think that would be honestly all that I could want. I just want, I have big goals for myself, but it's also just maintaining these simple day-to-day things that bring me a lot of fulfillment in my life now.
No, I love that. And sometimes it's just focusing on that day to day and then opportunities open themselves up. You know, we enjoy working with you, you know, in Ocean Rock, and kind of, you know, you volunteering for Ocean Rock sometimes to kind of outreach. You're just so passionate about it and about recovery, and so that kind of resonates, and people can see that. And you know, as we grow and, you know, as you kind of blossom, there's definitely more opportunities there. But as far as you know, that day-to-day that you were saying, I think that's so important that you can focus on that and not be distracted by all the noise around you. Because I think that's what gets a lot of people, is just there's so many distractions, there's so much going on, and if you start dwelling on all of it, I mean, things can get depressing, things can get overwhelming, and you kind of lose hope. But your current attitude is so refreshing, right? As far as just kind of, you know, just do the simple things. That's what it takes, right?
Yeah, and you're so right too, within the, you know, conversation about who you're spending time with and the environment that you're in, because obviously in LA there's a million distractions. I could be going out every night of the week, but you know, it's important for me to have really supportive people and friends. I have supportive roommate and just like a really amazing tight-knit community around me. So
That's
I
awesome.
think that, I've seen
awesome.
people with long-term success. With sobriety, I like to ask them like what they've done and try to see similarities between them. It's always, you know, a really amazing support network that has helped them stay sober.
Right. That you feel comfortable reaching out to and asking for help if you need it before it gets too bad. Kind of wanted to touch on the family again, just because, you know, we talked a lot about what, as you were going through all of this, now that you finished school, and, you know, I'm sure for the type of family you have, education is important, and kind of purpose is important. And so now that you finished school, you're working, you're out here, how has your relationship with your parents and family changed now that they know that you're sober and you're working on all these things?
Yeah, I will say that my parents and my sister, they were supportive through my entire addiction process, but they also had to put up boundaries within themselves, because, you know, I was just like
trying to take advantage.
Going crazy and just definitely not being the supportive person that I could be to them. So I mean, my family is amazing, and I wouldn't be able to be at the spot in my recovery without them. So
That's
we
huge.
talk like every day on the phone with my parents. I talk to my sister as much as I can, and we're all a really tight family.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome. You know, I want you to share a little bit with the audience some parts of your journey, and kind of just more of a action oriented. Hey, you know, if you guys are feeling a certain way, you know, this is what I would suggest, or just, and really based on your own personal journey, right? I mean, everyone is different, but there's somebody out there that's going through something similar to you. And if you were just looking, you know, at the camera, if you're talking to that person, what would you tell that person?
Yeah, I would definitely say reach out for help. I mean, I think it's shown time and time again, people trying to do things on their own, and if you routinely can't do it, reach out, because there's so many people like you guys that are there for help, other people that can help if maybe that's not it, that you guys can provide support for that. So it's it's really about not being afraid to talk about what you're going through, because when you keep it inside, I mean, for me, I just go crazy, and then a small thing blows up. So I mean, continuing with DBT therapy is really important for me. Also continuing to go to AA and just doing the small things. Like, seriously, I know I already said it, making my bed, but like,
you were on time today, so we appreciate that.
Yes, that's good.
Okay, so, you know, now imagine you're talking to a mother out there, or even a father, or a family member, somebody who is dealing with what you went through. And maybe they don't understand, maybe they do, but they don't know how to cope with it. What are some things you would tell them, that you would share with them, for them to be able to deal with it a little bit better, or for them to know what type of help that they need to get for their young teen or for their young adult?
Yeah, well, if they're under 18, I mean, I would say try to intervene as much as you can. You know, it's a difficult dance, because if you, I don't know, make the child feel suffocated, they can rebel even more. But then at the same time, you know, you have to try to like almost gain control over the situation, and that can feel just so chaotic. And it is an unfortunate thing that like sometimes it's just not going to work always. But I do see a lot of people who are successful because they have their family there supporting and intervening and saying, look, you need to really take your life seriously. I know it's maybe not affecting you yet, but you could like die of this. Like it's a severe issue. So yeah, I mean, just keep showing love and obviously taking care of themselves. But I think that it was really important that my family was just, always there and trying. And I had a really good foundation to fall back to once I got sober. And so I think that also set me up for success, because I see a lot of people who even struggle to stay sober. They didn't have a good foundation. So having a caring family that is intervening is going to be something for that person to come back to that is going to help them.
Right. And then what are some things that you noticed that your parents did that were effective? And even though it might have been annoying at the time, you're like, oh, can't believe they're doing this. Yeah. But ultimately now when you look back, those types of boundaries that they set were incremental in your recovery. And so maybe give us a little bit of insight on that.
Yeah, I think that setting boundaries for sure, like, giving me curfew or taking my phone away was helpful at times, but also putting me into therapy at a young age. I think that if I had just started therapy for the first time at 21, it would have been really difficult for me. So I think that honestly, everything they tried to do was very helpful. And even though I wasn't really wanting to go to treatment at that time, I do think that I was at least knowledgeable in what the recovery process was like for when I was ready to get sober. Like, I'm glad I was already introduced to that world. Right.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. And, sometimes I hear, kids that grow up and then they say to their parents that, you always said this thing, or whatever it was, right? Mm-hmm. It could be about daily living. It could be about sports. It could be about just some type of lesson that the parent was trying to teach that child. And the parent thinks that, well, the kid wasn't listening, right? Like, because they keep doing the same behavior, right? And it's like, you're not listening. And then later on in life, when the child is a little bit older and, they kind of have their shit together, they come to the parent and they say, I really remember when I was younger and you told me about this, or whatever it is, right? And then I think for the parent, it's one of those things where you say, oh my God, like, I didn't even know you were listening, right? Yeah. And so one thing I would tell parents out there is, doesn't matter how many times you say something or you try to teach a lesson, or how frustrated you get when your kids are not listening to you, and whether it's rebelling or whether it's just, making your life more challenging, they are hearing you, right? And so now today might not be the day where they're acting on it, but it's something that when they are ready, and that, all those years of you staying consistent and being the parent and not giving up, it'll always pay dividends. So it seems like that's kind of a journey that you had as well, where your family instilled a lot of really good qualities in you. You went through a period where you rebelled and rejected all of those and made their life, very challenging. But I'm so glad and happy to hear that you have, you're doing so well right now, and you're so focused on the future, and in your daily kind of mindfulness of being sober and working on the mental health and really understanding like what you're dealing with, right? I think that was the other thing you said, is like you kind of didn't know why you were acting certain ways, and once you got more information, you learned more about that. Before we leave, is there anything that you wanted to let people know, or just kind of a final message you wanted to leave behind?
Yeah, I think just kind of on the topics we touched on today. For one, if you're struggling personally with, getting sober, just like keep on going. And the best thing you can do for yourself is to just keep trying and understand, relapse can be a part of recovery. It doesn't have to be, but it can be, and that's okay. And also same to parents or loved ones of that person, is to also keep on going, keep on trying. I mean, obviously take care of yourself, but yeah, I am so grateful that my family was intervening and that they gave me all those values growing up, because then when I was ready, I was able to listen.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Audra, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Everyone, thank you for joining us today at Ocean Rock podcast. Again, we had Audra Hanson as our guest. If you want to learn more about Audra or learn about a program, feel free to comment, subscribe, ask questions. We have a whole team of people that are here ready and willing to help. Thank you.